Hello friends, today I'm beginning something new in the studio, an Ethnobotanical Journal. This will be a series of quiet study vlogs where I explore plants not only as botanical specimens but as living companions in human culture, trees and mosses and herbs that have shaped the way people have lived, traveled, healed, and learned to belong in their landscapes. These videos are an introduction to that practice. For those who want to go deeper, the full studies will live in Tier 2 on Patreon, The Forest Gatekeepers. That is where I'll share longer field notes, specimen sketches, reading lists, and the process of learning how to keep an ethnobotanical journal of your own. And if you're watching this from the Bohemian Salon Botanica, welcome. I'll be sharing these studies there as well, along with little glimpses from the studio and the landscapes that inspire them. I began this journal with a tree that many of us have seen countless times, often without realizing how extraordinary it is. The sacred fig, Ficus religiosa. When I first started reading about figs, I became curious about the folklore that surrounds them across many cultures. In tropical regions especially, large figs have long been considered places of spirits, ancestors, and meeting grounds between worlds. In Southeast Asia, including the island of Java, traditions around ancient trees have often described them as dwellings for unseen life and guardians of the forest. The people of the region, including Javanese people, have long lived in landscapes where enormous figs form natural gathering spaces and ecological hubs. And this made me think more broadly about how many indigenous cultures learn to read their environments with extraordinary attention. People such as the Inuit of the north, the Sami, or many forest communities across the tropics, developed ways of life that were deeply tuned to the rhythms of the land. They knew winds, snow, animal paths, flowering seasons, the small signals that tell you how to survive and belong in a place. It made me wonder how we as modern people who live between cities and landscapes might learn to discover in a little of that attentiveness again. And that is partly what this Ethnobotanical Journal is about. Right now, I'm in the early stages of learning this tree. I've begun with simple sketches, not detailed botanical plates yet, just observational drawings, leaves, branching patterns, the structure of the fig itself. When you begin a study like this, you take many small steps, sketching, collecting references, reading natural history, watching how the plant behaves in the landscape. Gradually, a picture forms in the mind, and eventually you begin to recognize the plant anywhere. For example, I can now draw the fig leaf from memory. Once that happens, something interesting changes in how you move through the world. You begin to notice the tree everywhere, even when it is growing quietly from the cracks of a wall, sending its roots down through stone in search of soil and water. One of the most extraordinary discoveries about figs is that their flowers are hidden. What we call a fig fruit is actually a hollow chamber filled with tiny flowers, a miniature secret garden inside the tree. And the only creature capable of entering that garden is a tiny insect called the fig wasp. The wasp enters the fig, pollinates the flowers, and lays her eggs. The next generation emerges, carrying pollen to another tree. Without the wasp, the fig cannot reproduce. Without the fig, the wasp cannot live. It's one of the most beautiful examples of ecological partnership on Earth. Some members of the fig family grow into something even more astonishing. The Banyan, Ficus benghalensis, sends roots down from its branches. These roots reach the ground and thicken into trunks. Over centuries, a single tree becomes an entire living structure, a forest made of one organism. These aerial roots from natural colonnades, like the pillars of a vast cathedral. Some banyans are so large that they could shelter about 20,000 people beneath their canopy, as they tend to grow across acres. So when you stand beneath a great fig, you are not only standing beneath a tree, you are standing inside an ecosystem. This is the feeling I hope to share through these journals. Ethnobotanical study begins with attention. You observe, you sketch, you read, you walk past the same tree again and again until its shape becomes familiar. Slowly, the plant stops being a background object and becomes a living presence in the landscape. Soon I'll be traveling north to the mountains of Hunza Valley. During that journey, I'll begin the next study for this journal, mosses. The moss world belongs to the plant group Bryophyta, tiny forest architects that create entire micro-ecosystems on rocks, trees, and soil. And for this first month of preparation, it was the sacred fig that asked me for my attention. If you'd like to follow these studies more closely and perhaps start an ethnobotanical journal of your own, you can join me on Patreon in Tier 2 as Forest Gatekeepers, where I share the extended lessons, readings, and field observations. And for collectors of nature journals, botanical prints, illustrated letters, and studio sketches, Tier 1 Luna Letters offers monthly art prints and seasonal letters from the studio. Those subscriptions help support this little ecological studio and allow me to continue these studies. Everything I'm working toward, these journals, the paintings, the forest studies, is part of a larger hope, a revival of ecological knowledge, a deeper care for forests, and perhaps a return to the simple practice of paying attention to the living world around us. And let's say it is my little but not so little campaign, although perhaps a slightly poetic one. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you soon for the next entry in the Ethnobotanical Journal.